part of what the left and right do in the most broad sense is, and that victimism stuff plays into it, construct a worldview, a theory of what is right behavior, what is wrong behavior. You all heard me talk, my favorite quote about rhetoric from Wayne Booth, which is, I'm quoting it from memory, but rhetoric is the art of probing what men believe they ought to believe. So rhetoric plays a big part in this project that I'm talking about. And for the left, for the last 30, 40 years, it's basically been some version of this political correctness thing, right? This woke thing. With, DEI, critical legal studies, whatever, the identity politics thing has been central to the left's construction of a set of manners. And the right's conception of manners has been, up until fairly recently, it still used the more conventional, traditional language, like manners, right? Like character. Because conservatism and the right, which are now very different things, I would argue, operate within the moral and historical context of the existing culture that they inherited. They have better vocabulary available to them to describe manners, right? They don't have to come up with new codes about norms and equity and inclusion, because the old language is still pretty good at describing a code of manners, right? Like, be a good person, open the door for people, don't be rude, don't cheat on your wife or your husband, don't brag about sexually assaulting people, and don't play Baron in the milkmaid with the interns, whatever. Like that kind of stuff that your pastor or rabbi would tell you constitutes good behavior. The right had access to that kind of vocabulary and those kinds of concepts. And for most of my life, they drew on them. And one of the things that made conservatives feel like they were, in fact, victims in society, that they were oppressed, that the left were the aggressors, is because a lot of those notions were being ridiculed or erased under the theory that built within them was racism and sexism and, patriarchy and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes at the margins, that was true, right? I mean, certainly on the patriarchy stuff, there is a lot of stuff in traditional culture that's a little patriarchal, because traditional culture is patriarchal. And, so some of those arguments were worthwhile, but it went really gangbusters, way too far, stop calling it history, call it herstory and all that nonsense. And regardless, the right's conception of what constituted right behavior, correct rhetoric, good character was pretty conventionally bourgeois. And that's one of the reasons why I like it. And Trump is the destructor of that too, right? I mean, it's like everybody chose the form of their destructor, and they thought that, like, the destructor, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, would only go after the other side. Trump has completely obliterated, all of the work that Bill Bennett put into the notions of good character and personal conduct. Looks like it comes from another century now. Well, in some ways it does, because a lot of that was written in the 90s. The Christian right's legwork on good character and good morals and all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying it's completely, I don't think it's gone for like rank and file Christians per se, like normal Christian people out there, whether they support Trump or not. But the idea that the current crop of sort of right-wing influencers and quote thought leaders, that are, part of the Republican industrial complex, the idea that they should be taken seriously when they try to use that vocabulary and persuade people about that vocabulary is just ludicrous, right? I mean, like Jesse Waters talking about how if your wife votes differently than you do, that's like having an affair. There was some famous pastor on Twitter who was talking about how it was a grave sin in Christianity to vote differently than your husband, unless your husband was voting Democratic and you were voting Trump, then that was fine, right? What's his face? Eric Metaxas was once considered a serious or semi-serious sort of normie responsible Christian leader, has lost his friggin' mind, right? I mean, he is competing with Tucker Carlson for demon paranoia. Jesse Waters famously cheated on his wife, right? Newt Gingrich is talking about, how outraged he was about this idea that wives lie to their husbands about who they're going to vote for, and you should never lie to your wife. And it begs the question, I shouldn't say begs the question, raises the question, which wife is he talking about? The moral probity stuff always opened the right up to charges of hypocrisy because people are flawed and fall short of their ideals all the time. It's not a new story. But with the embrace of Donald Trump and his behavior and his rhetoric, the conventional, traditional argument from the right about what constitutes good manners and good rhetoric and good behavior, that's over too. And for very similar reasons, right?